My name's Tom Romeo. I'm the president of Maximus Federal, and I'll introduce you to our other panel members in just a minute. I do have to say that that was a tough act to follow, and this is not that format, so we'll try to keep it entertaining, but I don't think it'll be as entertaining as the last one. So first of all, I wanted to just thank you all for giving us the time to come speak to you today. I think it's an exciting opportunity for us to be able to share some of our thoughts and experiences on performance-based models, how they work best, and some of the pluses and minuses of the different models and when they might fit for your acquisitions. With me today are Roy Stiles from Carson Solutions, William Randolph from ASI Government Solutions, who I think about 90% of you know, so seems like everyone in the room's coming up to him. He worked with you all. And Carolyn Garden from Dewberry. So the format of the session is that Roy and William are going to spend a few minutes setting the stage for performance-based contracts, and then each of us will take you through some case studies on things that we've seen work and what the benefits and challenges of some of those contract types are. So with that, Roy, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right, thank you. Next slide.
It's me, sorry.
I'll give you a moment to kind of soak the slide in. You're probably wondering why are we looking at a slide that has to do with the DDay Invasion in an outcome-based or performance incentives presentation. Let me explain a little. As the group got together and we met as a panel on and off over the last few weeks and months to kind of get ready for this and start sharing what we, putting together what we wanted to share with you, we kept running into a couple of themes. One of them was performance incentives is in terms of contract types. We kind of all know what those are. There's some commonalities. The incentives are a little obvious to how we do. Outcomes-based is a little bit different. It's not as cut and dry. There's not a specific contract type. So one of the things we kind of gained from that is we wanted to kind of bring it forward as a kind of a mindset as opposed to here's a tool or a specific set of tools. I come from a military background, retired Army. I used to teach plans, orders, and operations to senior NCOs getting ready to go out and be part of a battle staff. So one of the key things that I used to, examples that I used to always give to them in being outcome focused or objective focused was this operations order for D-Day, which was one of the largest or the largest military operation in our planet's history. You see some of the statistics there. One of the interesting things about it that I wanted to point out today and that I always pointed out to them is that this was an order that was issued 27 days before it was executed. It was intended to be executed even sooner than that, so 21 days out. Very important, and that is it was 5 pages long, which if I look at that compared to other military operations, I've had the opportunity to be part of the planning process. The operations plan for Bosnia was 4 to 6 binders thick. And that was because they spent an enormous amount of time focusing on the how and the details. What are we going to do? Who's going to do what when? Who coordinates with who? And all those things are important, but if you do too much of that, you lose sight of the most critical thing, which is the objective. So this was a 5-page document that outlined one objective for the largest military operation in history, and that was get me a beachhead. Get me a place to put my armies. We'll talk about the rest after that, but go focus on doing that. So that's the kind of outcome-based thinking we wanted to present, and just give you a different perspective to think about it. This comes from my history or my background, and I'm sure if you look around in kind of your vernacular, things that are meaningful to you, you'll find similar kind of concepts that we wanted to help you hook onto it, and this helps me hook onto objectives. We're focusing on the objectives, focusing on the what, not the how. Because if everyone knows what the goal is, we can all take advantage of opportunities that pop up along the way to move that ball forward, whether it's an acquisition or it's within technical. Objective, outcome-based thinking is what we're trying to drive at here.
Okay, great, thanks, Roy. William's going to take us through a little bit of the models and the contract types that we're talking about today.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here. and actually have an opportunity to channel my inner professor. I know this isn't an opportunity to teach. However, I see this, and we see this from an industry's perspective, as an effective model for how performance incentives can be derived and utilized. So we are looking forward, and I am looking forward to describing this environment. As you see in the model, there are 4 big areas. And as I am and have historically been an advocate for outcomes, one would say we start with outcomes. But even in this environment, in a performance incentives perspective, I think from an industry's perspective, we would love to make sure that there's an understanding of the marketplace, a true, deep, rich understanding of the marketplace, so that the outcomes can actually be articulated and derived from what the marketplace is providing. And if you need to use incentives, what incentives would be best utilized based on what the marketplace is currently involved in providing. So the marketplace, 1, know thy marketplace. That's a recommendation, an offer that we have from an industry perspective. And the second is, once you know that marketplace, how does that marketplace influence the results or truly the outcomes, and not just success results or outcomes, but I think both, because it's one thing to say this is what we want the contract to do. The second thing is what does that performance actually get us? So that second piece is really then defining what we'd like to offer is a clear definition and articulation of the defined outcomes. The third, which is, in my opinion, probably the most important, at least from an industry perspective, is knowing that there is an ongoing information exchange and a resulting market intelligence. That's, in my opinion, and in our opinion, critical to the understanding not only the marketplace, but then also the success outcome. The reason why in this graphical representation it's long and it's going and it shows movement or attempts to denote movement is because it should be continuous. That because the world, the marketplace often changes, especially in the IT environment, when we first start thinking about, or when the government first starts thinking about a requirement, before that requirement actually materializes into something that the government can go contract for, the industry and the marketplace may have changed. And as a result of that information exchange, whether it's RFIs, due diligence, industry days, reverse industry days, all of these things are beneficial to industry, and we greatly appreciate their presence. The fourth piece, which really feeds into the larger solicitation from our perspective, is the draft pieces of the solicitation. Industry encourages the federal government to release drafts. We think that's valuable, and we really like that. But I tell you, the other pieces that matter to us just as much are Section B. How is the government thinking about pricing the solution? And as a result of that, what other sections, particularly Section L and Section M, what homework are you going to give us? And then how are you going to grade it from that perspective? So those 4 pieces, in my opinion, in the end, tell a compelling story. And in the end, that's really what we're hoping as industry participants is happening, that there is a compelling story being told. And I'll tell you, from an industry perspective, a story is being told whether it's intentional or not. The industry takes the pieces and they put a story together. So the ask, probably the largest ask from a performance incentive model is that government be as intentional as possible in when they're putting their pieces together to articulate a story. Next slide, please. So this is industry's perspective on performance incentives. We start off with cost, but understanding that most of the industry participants in this area provide commercial services. We'll be in the fixed price arena, but I think it's good to have a conversation, at least initially, about fixed price and award fee incentives, and then and more importantly, the industry behavior that they articulate. So in fixed price environments, it is really about how do we control cost as a percentage of the negotiated fixed fee, and that realizes a higher return for industry. So we're very interested in contracts of that nature. Award fees, similarly, I had a boss very early in my career that used to call it award fee love, that is really about the relationship, and it articulates subjective criteria of the government-industry relationship. So in those award fees realize a higher fee based on judgmental performance, truly subjective performance. And there's value there. Moving into the commercial realm of goods and services, the fixed price environment is really about profit for every dollar that costs are reduced. While it's the cleanest, it's actually the most, in my opinion, the most efficient, because both sides of the organization or both sides of the business relationship understand the dynamic that's in play. There's not many curves and twists in that contract environment, and industry greatly appreciates that. The next is the incentive targets area that often finds itself in production or systems development. Sometimes a lot of things we don't necessarily do in the greater DC metro area. However, the earning of fee and profitability is based on reduction of cost. The last, and probably certainly not the least, is really the outcomes-based and the outcomes focused and performance-based, which really isn't necessarily a contract type from industry's perspective, but it is indeed a focus. And that focus in terms of understanding not only the work to be done, but the intended outcome of the work, that process allows for greater alignment of incentives, greater alignment of production and services rendered, as well as clearly understanding everyone pulling in the same direction. I really love the acting USM's comments this morning when he was talking about everyone pulling in the same directions. Outcomes-focused contracts, incentives truly support and incentivize that behavior. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, William. So Roy's going to take us through our first case study, and that's on the cost plus award fee.
All right, thank you. This is our first case study of the day. And this is IT application development and maintenance contract, rather large, focused on Agile and DevOps for one of our, I would say, it could be Department of Awesome or Department of Amazing. We didn't use that vernacular, but I wish we did. Well, it might not be yours, whether it's awesome or amazing. But very similar to what you see a lot of coming out nowadays across many agencies, not just Department of Awesome. Next slide.
By the way, Department of Awesome is DOA. I don't think that's a good acronym.
I didn't think that through. Well, actually, that wasn't mine. I forget.
Right.
We'll go with the other one. Pretty straightforward cost plus award fee, and we all generally know what that means. I wanted to point out a few things around this because it was an Agile. The technical work is Agile and DevOps. I don't know that the procurement was necessarily intended to be done in an Agile way, but there's some elements of the award fee structure and how we do the quarterly reviews that is Agile and it is iterative. And I wanted to kind of highlight some of those things and how it's benefited the government, and more importantly, kind of how it's influenced our behaviors as a vendor, to give you some thoughts on how you might structure those types of contracts going forward if it applies. It's a quarterly award fee review board, which is fairly standard. It focuses on 4 different areas: customer relationship, technical, cost control, and reporting. I bring this out because that balance, to me, is very important. You'll see a lot of, whether it's award fee or SLA-driven contracts that are very focused on technical aspects of a program or technical aspects of delivery. And the behavior that drives too often is too much focus there at the expense of other areas. If 100% deliverables being on time is the driver, that's what we're going to focus on. even if quality might slip a little bit. If quality is the focus, then we will definitely nail that. Timing and schedule may slip a little bit. So having that focus across all four of those areas has really forced us as a business to make sure that we're constantly focusing on all of those areas consistently, because you can't make one of those up at the last day or the last week before the review board. So having that balance, I think, is very important when you're doing incentives, is not to incentivize too much in one direction while not providing a balance on the other end, or making sure you keep that across the board. Specific goals, there's not, one of the unique things, we don't have SLAs. There's not very specific criteria for our award fee built into the contract that's consistent throughout the period of performance. I know everyone in here's done some variety of contract and procurement. By show of hands, how many of you have defined a requirement in any procurement that was the same 5 years later at the end of the period of performance? One. I'm going to come find you later. I want to know what it is. But that's well, yeah. Other than deliverables on time, some of those basic things. There's not too many that really survive that long, and in this day and age, it's even less so. So there's flexibility in it that allows us to, on that quarterly basis, evaluate what's important to the client, what's important, what areas they want to focus on, what political winds may be driving shifts, and set goals together based on that we then go out and work to execute on. That kind of iterative approach and allowing the government to change focus allows us to go out and meet changing demands and not deal with, well, we need to do a modification, or I don't necessarily have resources to do that. I can be a lot more flexible because I know what's going on quarter to quarter, and it puts a lot more of our executive leadership focus on how are we managing that customer, how are we meeting all those needs, as opposed to, yeah, don't worry, boss, all the deliverables on time, we're good. Those kind of things get I won't say pushed off to the side, but when there's an award fee attached to it, and there's changing priorities and changing needs, executive leadership stays very engaged in understanding what those needs are. Are they being met? Where are we statusing on it? Do you have the resources you need? Those kinds of things. I come from a program management background, so as a program manager, I love to have a little bit of executive engagement in making sure I have the resources I need to deliver. So that's one of the ways to do it. Another unique thing about that review board is even the folks that are on it change from quarter to quarter. Not a lot of change usually, but as over the several years, we've seen changes as priorities have changed. Different parts of the business became more critical to the client over a period of time, so they would put that business stakeholder into that review board or switch them out. That allows allows the government to adjust kind of their prioritization or the method of prioritization within the award fee. So while we've had a lot of shifting priorities, we've had a lot of different things that have gone on over the period of performance, we haven't had to change the structure because the structure was there to be iterative. It was there that allowed for that flexibility. And I could spout several outcomes that are specific to the contract that would be very impressive in the Agile and DevOps world. I'll refrain from doing that other than to say those specific outcomes that we received, and I'd love to give anyone a detail, but those specific outcomes, none of them were ones that were defined in the award fee review board. No one ever said, I want you to eliminate all my development environments and find me a way to do it at X amount of reduced costs. What we did was we want to reduce cost here, and I want you to show me innovative ways to do it. I want a solution, and I want to see how far you can go. And what we found was if you give me a target of reduce cost by 10%, I will reduce cost by 10.1%. And then I'm good, because then I'll go focus on the other things. If you tell me you want me to reduce costs as much as possible, or reduce costs within without impacting quality or impacting delivery, you'll be surprised more often than not that us not knowing exactly where your goal target is, we will work much harder to achieve it, and in some cases exceed it, just because we don't know where far enough is. So it's been a good back and forth. I would caution against very specific requirements or definition of SLAs in an award fee review board or any performance incentive. You got to know those targets. So some of those are regulatory or you got to absolute bare minimums. But anytime you get a chance to ask a vendor to show me what you got, show me what you can do or how far or how fast you can go, you may be surprised on how fast we'll travel just to prove a point. Why this method works, just as a kind of a recap, the format and structure of the award fee and award fee review covered all aspects of delivery, including technical and cost. And there's also some elements of reporting and relationship management, communication in general. Those are important to make sure you're not incentivizing one side at the expense of the other. It allowed the government to define specific goals throughout the period of performance rather than just the pre-award stuff, trying to define what's the SLA, what's the criteria we need today that we will still need 5 years from now. Gave that flexibility to move back and forth, and also allows managing of stakeholder changes. So they can change key stakeholders in that review process, which lets them, different parts of the business, get the influence they need when they need it as the business needs change throughout the years and months. And that's it for me.
Thank you, Roy. I just want to make kind of an overall point on performance-based contracting before I turn it over to Carolyn. And that is, the contracting community wants the same thing you want, which is success on the program. What we like about performance-based contracting is when you allow us to bring our best practices and innovation to the contract, because the performance that we can bring comes from the expertise that we have, and over-specification on how to do the work limits our ability to bring you the best solution. So whether the performance-based is in an award fee or it's in an outcomes-based payment really is kind of how much motivation and flexibility we have to bring that innovation and those ideas. But it really gives us the best ability to help you get to where you want to be at the end. So Carolyn, I'm going to turn it over to you to talk about cost plus award fee.
No. Fixed price incentive.
Sorry, fixed price
okay.
incentive.
No worries. Thank you. I'm Carolyn Gardner. I'm the Director of Contracts at DDay, so I feel kind of akin to this room because I'm a contracts person at heart. So this first case study, I have two. I'll go over. Is one that actually I think really epitomizes what a performance-based contract should be. This was a utility management contract with design build improvements that were built into it. It was a large program but it was a fixed price incentive target contract, but it also had elements of firm fixed price with price redetermination and cost sharing with the government. Actually, the way the government issued this solicitation was it did not define the contract. The government actually focused very much on, as we've been talking about, what the government wanted to achieve in the outcome and what was important to the government and how to manage the utility and what they defined as success. And they actually asked industry to propose what kind of contract industry wanted. So they got, I believe, a wide swath of different types of contracting. And it was up to industry to bring their best to bear. And different kinds of companies had very different types of solutions. It was probably one more challenging from a government perspective in order to analyze those and determine best, what was best value. And only upon award did we actually sit down and negotiate the contract. And so we then sat down over an extended period to negotiate this contract. And I actually participated in 2 different ones of this type of contract. It was very interesting, and then over time in managing it. So you can go to the next slide. So in this type of environment where we had, as you said, a fixed price incentive fee, or fixed price, incentive target, as well as a firm fixed price within redeterminations over certain intervals and periods of time going forward, and then doing those price redeterminations, if there was significant cost savings, those cost savings would be shared between industry and government. It was very creative. And what it allowed to do in this kind of unusual environment of O&M, as well as needing to do constructed improvements, it really married the two of those elements. I don't know how much, if you've done these types of maintenance contracts, those that are maintaining have one need and have one priority that they're trying to achieve. When you're trying to go in and do improvements and you have a constructor come in, often the way they construct things don't always balance with what's needed to do the long-term cost-efficient management of a system. This drove the two, married them together, and then those cost savings that occurred over time could then be shared between industry and government. It was a really unique type of way to manage a facility. And over the long term, it really created quite a collaborative environment between the stakeholders at the facility and the government. And the contractor. So it also provided the government an opportunity to continue to have input throughout that contract life cycle. The price revisions create a lot of flexibility to manage risk for the contractor. So the contractor didn't feel like when you're doing these long-term kind of contracts and there's a lot of unknowns, what contractors tend to do sometimes is price in some extra risk because of the unknowns. You just don't know how it's going to come out. Those price redeterminations at these different intervals allowed to some relief, and so that what didn't create quite as much risk. And at least if we did take on the risk, if we did have a loss, it wasn't going to be, that loss bleeder for an extended period of time. So it really was quite, and the last piece to this would be, and the incentive targets that we had on the contract, those really kind of helped us manage the day-to-day interaction with the stakeholders in the utility. We had a very objective, I should say, not subjective, but a very objective set of targets that we would have to meet in delivering the day-to-day management of the utility. And those were things, we had customer surveys that we had to obtain, and we had to keep a 90% or better, rating on those customer surveys. We had response times we had to meet for emergency call-outs, those kind of things. And as long as we kept in those range of performance, we got our incentive fee. So it really was a very balanced contract. Government worked with us in order to obtain that, and they really worked with us throughout the life cycle of the contract. And that's part of a little bit, in this case study, I'd like to also emphasize, going into these outcome-based contracts, there is the part of setting that up and doing the right type of RFP structure, but also in making sure how you're gonna manage that contract throughout that life cycle is really key. You've got to have a set of stakeholders from the government side as well as industry to manage that contract through. It's an unusual type of, to really structure it that outcome-based is not always something a lot of PMs are always as comfortable with. So you want to make sure that everyone's on board with how we're going to manage the contract and bringing that forward and understanding what that type of contracting methodology is. And when everyone's in that same, everyone's really trying to pull that together, it's quite impressive what can be accomplished and how much can be done in a positive way for the stakeholders at the utility and at the base. Next slide. The other case study I had is a fixed price award fee contract. And this contract is more of engineering and technical services. That's the background I have with DeBerry. And it was a very large program. It's a multiple award contract, so there are more than one contractor involved, and multiple task orders. You can go ahead to the next slide. And looking at this kind of contract, why it worked, it was very structured on what the government was looking for was meeting schedule and quality performance. And that was built into the award fee plan. Providing the ongoing, it allowed for the ongoing feedback with the client and through the satisfaction surveys. And this kind of contract, it was key for the quality And so the award fee really was the best structure for that kind of contract, because it allowed for that more subjective view of approach. And it really promoted also across industry, so multiple stakeholders involved in this. It allowed for that kind of discussion and openness of arrangements between the contractors as well as government. Some things that we learned on this type of contract, and I have looked at in doing award fee contracts, because there was multiple IDIQ holders, multiple task orders, the quarterly award fee structure was probably a little difficult to manage, both for contractors and for industry. You kind of were in a constant cycle of award fee evaluations and then finalizing them and getting through the payment process. Because of that back and forth communication in award fee, it was a constant kind of cycle. And also, I think for a company, DeBerry specifically would pride themselves in saying, we don't like to do a lot of change orders. When things in an award fee plan are structured around, let's say, schedule, if anything's going to be happening with schedule, industry will make sure that we're going to need to have a change order, because if that's what we're going to be evaluated against, if there's things that impact us, we're going to need to look at those change, getting a change order in order that we don't negatively impact our award fee. So it probably drove a little more change order management, even for the government, than probably they were expecting. But that's where those, having to understand your metrics sometimes will drive industry behavior. So those were probably the two things I just thought we could share for some element of improvement, or help. It's understanding the opposite ends of what do I want to say? Sometimes when some of your interest to drive certain behavior then also has some antecedent behavior. So.
Thank you, Carolyn. All right, so I'm going to, excuse me, I'm going to talk a little bit about what I would call outcomes-based. It's really mostly on a fixed unit rate basis. So Maximus, we do a lot of work. We do only government work, and it's mostly on business process type work. So we do things like handle Medicare appeals or do case preparation for government entities. And what we find with these is usually they're paid on a fixed unit rate, so per appeal, per case prep, per call handled, those types of things. And there are also sub-measurements in there. So timeliness, quality, all become part of the equation for the delivery. And those are incented in a different way. I'll talk about that in a minute, or could be incented in many different ways. So a lot of our work requires us to do things like case preparation, records management, performance management of our staff, and data analysis and reporting back to the customer. Could be the case on things like background clearance, where we do case preparation for a government employee to make a decision. Actually, in some of our Medicare work, we make the decision on the appeals. So it could be either way, but usually they include all of that type of work. One of the things that we find with these programs is that there needs to be some history in the program before you can get to the fixed unit rate that both the government and the contractor are going to feel comfortable with. So a lot of times what we've seen is that if it's a new program, the first year or two may be done on a cost plus fixed fee or cost plus award fee basis to get a baseline for how long the work's going to take, how many man hours, what the scale of the program is going to be, what the volume is going to be, and then after a year or two, switch to a fixed unit rate. And I'll talk about why would you want to do that? Why would you want to switch to a fixed unit or an outcomes-based model? So in a cost-plus model, basically, you're telling me, or we're together deciding how many people it takes to do the work. But my rate is based on the number of people that are out there and the fee that we've negotiated in advance. There really is no payment for incentive. So it's very hard for me to bring my best practices to the table, because if that includes automation or it includes changing process or procedures, those are really pretty well defined in the cost-plus model. When we fix to a per unit rate, I am incented to drive the cost of performing down through bringing my best practices to the table, for bringing automation and innovation to the table, usually in concert with the customer to let you know what we're doing. And where that drives to ultimately is a lower unit rate when you renew the contract or recompete the contract. So if I can drive down my costs, when I rebid it, I'm going to give you the advantage of that. I can tell you that in some of our examples where we've had this play out, that over time, we see reductions in cost of 35, 40% in our ability to drive the price down to do the work. So it gives us a lot of flexibility to use best practices. It focuses us on the outcome. So if really, let's go back to the example of case prep. So say you're the State Department and you set up appointments to interview people for green cards or visas. If what the outcome that you're looking for is a totally completed case, so no canceled appointments. So that would be a metric you would hand to us. We would only be paid on cases that get the appointment completed. I can tell you that in a fixed price contract, our incentive may be 7% of fee to do that. On the outcomes based, really our CPARs, our payments on the outcomes, our future on the contract is going to be based on how effective we are at getting those cases completed and into your hands. So there are a lot of levers you as a government have to pull to make sure that we're getting you the outcome that you need in those projects. So I talked about the case prep type model. We do a lot of work also for state, local governments, and international governments on sustainable employment. And some of those contracts, we don't get paid. So we take on cases of people on welfare. We don't get paid until we find someone a job. We get paid again when they're in the job for 6 months, and we get paid again when they're in the job for 18 months. So if sustainable employment is the outcome, that's what the payment's tied to. So why are these models good for both the contractor and the government? First of all, risk mitigation. So we're taking the risk that we're going to get the outcome, and you're sharing that risk with us by driving the behaviors and tying them to the payment. The mission alignment is the best piece. So, I think we're both then incented to get the outcome that you're looking for, and we know very clearly what that outcome is. I worked, before I worked for Maximus, I worked for IBM for years. I loved working for IBM, but I have to say there were some programs where we had QASPs, and the government was saying to us, we want you to tie your QASP to our outcome. And we were saying, well, we only control this little piece of the program, so we can't really sign up for what you're asking us to sign up for. In an outcomes-based contract, you would expect that the alignment would be very clear. Program alignment, budget alignment is good, but I'll tell you that I think it's one of the challenges with this contract type. Because if I'm very successful at driving the outcome you want, you may pay me more because I got more outcomes than you expected. So go back to the welfare to work example. What if I find everyone a job? Now, great, there's a cost benefit there to the government, but there's also a budget that says, well, we didn't expect that much success on the program. I could tie that to immigration, right? So what if we cleared your whole backlog of appeals? That would be a great thing, only if you had the budget for us to clear the whole backlog of appeals. So it's something that we would have to work on together to say, how do we contain the success and match the budget to the success for the program? It certainly has measurable value. So you can bring forward to the department, look at the success that we've had. We love to have that tied to your success. There is increased transparency because you know exactly whether we've met the outcomes or not met the outcomes. And it penalizes poor performance in a lot of ways, starting with the payment. So it gives us the advantage to effectively leverage our expertise and resources. It's better risk-reward sharing. There's better alignment. And at the end of the day, what we as contractors all want is that you and we are aligned with what success on the program means and looks like. The best relationships with any of us is when we are sitting down with you and making sure that in any of these award models, we're aligning the incentives to the outcomes that you want. And I think these are great. The advantage to the citizen or to the government is there's better fulfillment of government needs to focus on what matters. So go back to the IBM example. You know, we were very proud to deliver systems that helped you enroll people, but if they performed a millisecond faster, it was hard to really look at what the advantage is at the end of the day. And then there's better alignment to the taxpayer because they're getting the most for their spend on the dollars. So some of the key industry messages and recommendations, and I'll ask the panel to share some of their thoughts as well, but it requires a different management approach. I think you've heard that across the panel. One of the risks with this is the best way that it works is when there are only a few outcomes defined. And the temptation is to delve down into service level agreements that drive all kinds of behaviors that might not actually help get the outcome. So I'll give you a great example to that. We do some call center work. And one of the service level agreements that I see come across a lot is average handle time. I would challenge you to define when that's really the best outcome for the government. Because the behavior that drives for me is to make sure that I get those citizens off the phone within the time frame that you allotted me. Really, if I could bring technology that helps solve more problems up front and bring more difficult problems to call agents, my average handle time is going to go up. But your result is going to be much better. So we need to really get to the metrics that drive the outcome without getting down into the details of when I said, you know, we do like mail intake and case management, a lot of times there's a temptation to say, well, we want you to open the mail within the first 2 hours that you get it. We want you to get the file set up within the first 24 hours. That limits my innovation in a big way. So while I think those metrics are things we should talk about, I don't think they're probably incentives that you want to put in place.
I'd like to jump on that just a little bit. Is my take on kind of the difference between defining outcomes or objectives versus the use of SLAs and performance metrics. Where I've seen it be successful for both vendor and government is where SLAs and performance metrics are kind of used as the left and right limits. You don't go past this point. You will be at least this good. But then let those left and right limits define the borders, but the objective is something different that's out front. That way they don't have to compete with each other. They don't necessarily always have to be 100% supporting. But you have tons of requirements in the FAR and you know, your policies and procedures. There's lots of places where you must be at least this good or you must do this at least this way. Those should become kind of your left and right limits, but let the objectives be the one thing that we can all go toward together, understanding what those left and right limits are.
Any other comments on that?
I would just add that I believe that I mentioned it earlier, but every action, every artifact is a part of a story. And that story is being interpreted by industry every day. One of the things that surprised me, I just retired last year, so one of the things that surprised me in the industry space is that the capture process is 18 months long. 12 to 18 months long, an effective capture process. And as a result of that, any piece of information that is captured or that is realized are like pieces of a puzzle. And industry starts putting the pieces of the puzzle together. And the more pieces we have, the better the outcome, the better we can serve the outcome. So I'll just go back to every action, every artifact is telling a story. So be intentional about that.
That's good. No, and I think it's a very good comment, and I wrote a lot of notes this morning when Chip spoke, because I think so much of what he was talking about really dovetails into this performance-based contracting, the innovation side, the thinking about the what is the goal and what defines success, as opposed to how you do it, not getting into the opening mail within X number of time and doing this. Those steps, often we get so many performance work statements that are, they're really not performance work statements. They're much more about, they're telling you the scope, they're telling you exactly how to do the work. If you define what is it that success is, and working with the stakeholders in whichever agency or what you're trying to define, it takes longer, but industry really would like to, I don't think you really know how much industry would really like to partner with you on that. Yeah. Finding out that piece and then helping create the right incentives to get you where you want to be. Through the RFI process and getting that feedback. I think, industry probably will have some good suggestions for you. And so I really encourage you to open up that thinking and that aperture to go towards that, because that's going to be the innovation, and that's going to be how you manage to getting to those truly successful opportunities. Yep. And so it really is, it's quite rewarding to be a part of those kind of programs. As someone who's worked on a couple of them, pretty significant ones, and some ones that had a little more trials and tribulations. It can really be truly rewarding, and industry really wants to get there with you, and because I think these are the kind of things that for them the payout is beneficial in both ways, profitability as well as though in kind of those interesting programs that industry likes to work on.
So just two other points, then we'll open it up for questions. So the first is that you have a tremendous amount of levers that are non-monetary to use. So structuring a contract that says this is a base plus 2 option years with a 3rd option year based on your performance. So if I perform well, give me more time on the contract. We as contractors would react very positively to that. The other is our CPARs, which is you get to rate us, and believe us, we all know how important those ratings are. So we want to make sure that we're getting the best. I'll give you an example of an extreme. So we do some work in the UK on welfare to work. They divided the country up into 8 segments and gave awards to 8 different contractors. At the end of the year, the lowest performer's work went to the best performer. Talk about some incentive. So I mean, that is an extreme, but it shows kind of the metrics that you have and the levers that you have to go. The other thing that I would say, I think we as a group talked about quite a bit, is it's going to be critical that you get the business users involved in the conversation about the performance and the outcomes. Yep. It's not going to be perfectly defined when we sign the contract and we start working. You're going to have to make modifications. If it becomes just strictly a contract discussion that says you didn't do it, it may incent the behavior in a direction you don't want it to go. So I would go back to my average handle time discussion on the contact center. If that's in there, and together we're saying, you know what, you brought an innovative IVR unit that's now handling all of our frequently asked questions, but your average handle time went up, the quality's great, but you're answering more difficult questions, then you may want to say, you know what, that objective was not right. Let's correct that so that we can move forward together to get the outcome we want. So unless we have any other comments, in summary, I'll just open it up to Q&A.
Unless there are no questions, in which case we'll just keep talking till the time's up.
On your performance incentive slide, you were talking about the FFP and the application of. You had mentioned that agile development could work well. Can you give me examples of when it could work well and when it does not for FFP?
I'll take that. One example where firm fixed price can work, I think can work well for agile development is you've got a set team size, and that team is going to work iterations over a period of time. And I know if I've got a 7-member team and they're going to work, iterations throughout a year, I know what my cost is going to be for that team to perform. What's difficult, or what's the challenge is what I can't necessarily tell you is what is the exact output that they're going to create over that period of performance, which is something you need more definition on under firm fixed price environment. So some of the things that I've seen scenarios where we've tried to use story points or different means of measuring how much application is built or how much business value is provided. That's a challenge. It's very subjective, but it can work. That's probably the best example of how I would see agile development done in a firm fixed price environment. The important thing there is there's got to be flexibility for the agile part to work. There's got to be flexibility of what's being delivered when and how fast. And it has to really be a discussion of, we want to get a team in place, and then I want to see how fast you can go or how well you can perform. So short periods of performance, although my colleagues and my boss would shoot me for saying it, shorter periods of performance will incentivize that performance a little more, although it puts more burden back on you to recompete and do those kinds of things. But I think agile development can work in a firm fixed price environment. I think in some senses, once again, my boss would shoot me, probably more so than in a time and materials or some of the other ones, just because it's, hey guys, well, I want a team in place. Bring your best team and perform well, and you'll keep working.
And really, if you're basically time boxing sprints, right?
Exactly.
So you could say, for this price, we can give you 5 sprints, and then kind of the negotiation's going to be about what's in the sprint.
Right, what's in the sprint, or what qualifies as a successful sprint.
And
What is how we define that sprint.
Right.
And that means a lot of interaction.
Right.
Yep.
And just to add to that, I've also seen where chunks of code, significant lines of code, maybe 10,000 lines of code, are pre-priced. So you have a menu of, I need 5,000 lines, 10,000 lines, and they're already pre-priced at the beginning. So when the agile process requires another chunk of code, it's already pre-priced. There it is. And you have marketplace pricing, marketplace pressures to price those chunks of code.
With quality and testing parameters to make sure that you're not just writing lines of code to produce outputs.
Yeah, we've all read a book where the author got paid by the word.
I saw the eyebrows go up. Yeah.
Hi, I got a question, Carolyn. The example you gave in one of your case studies related to you guys kind of selecting a contractor as the awardee before you established the different contract types on, it was multiple different contract types using one contract. How do you set an evaluation criteria to pick that winner before you have some of those very fundamental elements identified?
Right. I mean, obviously, I was on the contractor side on this, but I think the government evaluation was more established on, we had to draw on what the success factors were for the government that they wanted to see in a long-term contract. So it was driving to more of the technical solution that we were giving, as well as the model we were proposing. So each different companies basically gave different models, and they were evaluating those solutions to which drove what the government was looking to achieve. In this case, there was a lot of repair work on a government utility that had been aging. So there was the entire structure of how were we going to manage the day-to-day and upkeep of the system, as well as then dovetailing in managing with the government how we would do the upgrades and achieving a more robust utility for the larger. Basically, the idea was it was going to be a larger footprint that was needed, larger group of, it was an ever-expanding group, I want to say customer base. So there would, how to do that whole upgrade. So it was a more complicated effort by the government, I think, to evaluate that, because they were very dynamic, different solutions from different types of companies. There was more of a utility rate-based proposal, I believe, and from what we were able to understand through industry and people talking to each other, as well as more of a constructor type of AE type of solution. And I think what the government liked was being able to partner in that AE type solution and be much more of a partner and going forward and hand in hand working with the provider. Separately from a utility rate based, if it was just straight rates, it was the incentives weren't going to be there to really engage with the government on a day-to-day basis. So I think in that case, that's what they were able to say. These were the types of things they were looking for in their evaluation criteria, and we were able to meet what they were looking for. Does that answer your question?
I wanted to follow up on my answer to my question before, because I thought of something else around firm fixed price and agile development. One of the challenges in that is, if I have a fixed team and I know what that team is, firm fixed works. If I need to be able to shift what that team structure looks like, I need to bring in a key, maybe expensive resource for a period of time to get over a certain hurdle, or size that team up or down, or throttle it up or down, firm fixed price becomes a real challenge for me. So it really kind of depends on how level is or how consistent is your effort expected to be over the period of performance, whether or not firm fix would work or not. That would be an area where I would see a high level of risk. If I got to bring in a key resource that I don't know how long I'm going to need them, I got to price them for the whole period of performance. That increases cost to you or risk to me, one or the other. So just want to follow that up.
Well, and I'd also, one thing when we've been talking about these different types of contracts, I mean, it really is on the government in this vein of what is it you're looking to achieve, because the types of incentives versus an award fee, where you place your the objectives are. I mean, it's going to drive what industry does. So the incentive versus if certain objectives in an award fee, as you talk about picking a couple, is really important. But understand it. That's what we're going to be measured on. That's what our own corporate management will be measuring us as to achieving those goals and bringing back so we achieve the maximizing that fee. And so we're measured on that from both directions. Then, as the PM or whoever's delivering the contract, both government and our management is identifying that. So that's what's going to drive what we do every day on that contract. So you really need to think through what you want to achieve in defining those award fee or incentive fees contracts. And I think sometimes I've seen the government's a little more surprised at how behavior gets driven because you want to do all these other things, but it's like, well, but at a minimum I got to do these things so I can maximize my fee return, and that's just what happens.
I guess what I would ask you.
I was going to say, if there are no other questions, I want to make a comment.
Sure.
So I think all too often we get lost in the word requirements. And requirements have heretofore, with a few exceptions, fallen under the definition of how to, from what we've all seen. Recently, I was in a conversation, I think it was the Hacking for Defense group, that talked a lot about your problem statement. What is the problem that you're trying to solve? And let that guide us in achieving outcome-based solutions. In other words, define what's the problem, like you were saying. We're trying to eliminate an immigration backlog, or we're trying to make sure that we're being responsive to inquiries on the call center. And then let that drive us, certainly setting standards, because there are minimum standards for how long it should take to answer a phone, that kind of stuff. But the point being, start with the problem statement in your RFI, for lack of a better term, but even in your RFP, so that you invite the best thinking of industry, and then define what you mean by innovation versus best practices, because they're not the same thing. Would you agree with those?
Definitely.
Absolutely. Even from a perspective of the outcome and problem statement, one of the examples we often use with our clients is asking the question or asking the directive that I need to get to Florida. And that's great. That's a great piece of information. You can go off and execute on that. But imagine if you said, I want to go to Disney World on Thursday.
Right.
Okay. That sets a different parameters.
Exactly.
Knowing you can't get in the car and do it.
Right.
You know, you got to go airplane, you know, some other dynamics. So it's really articulating the outcome in that perspective. That problem statement truly.
But it doesn't mean I have to take a flight, right?
Absolutely.
Exactly. That's
Absolutely.
exactly the point.
Yes.
Yeah. No, thank you.
And I would add, so in the fixed unit rate model, we're usually bringing the technology to solve the problem, and innovation comes with some risk, right? If you're going to push the envelope and introduce technology to speed up the system or speed up the outcome, it doesn't always work. But the risk is on us at that point. And, you know, I can tell you, to Carolyn's point, my management's going to be asking me, what makes you think that this innovation is going to really give us the cost benefit that you hope for? To the earlier discussions, I think one of the challenges for you all is, how do you get innovation introduced into your programs? And in some of the models, it actually puts it back on us.
In some of these issues, we're dealing with innovation, with software, and once you go down a software route, you've plugged in and connected your software to other software to other software, which makes it seem like you're kind of stuck with a vendor once you've built that process. So in innovation, first off, problem statement of how you define the problem statement clear enough that you can actually extricate from one vendor, because the role of the government isn't to be the permanent employer for a specific vendor.
Yeah.
And then the second piece is how you then can work to look at the universe of other vendors. I don't know if you can address those.
Yeah, we would never want you to be stuck with us. Do you want to take a cut at that?
I would love for you to be stuck with us. However, we don't build a product per se. Some of the ways that I would, avoiding vendor lock-in is probably one of the hardest, one of many of the hardest things to do in information technology, particularly in what you need to do, because you need to, building it yourself takes a long time, and that's, you can get incremental benefit doing it, so but you'll almost never get to a done state of a build-it-yourself application. Buying it off the street or COTS can get you 80% of their way there, maybe 50, maybe 90. There's always some customization that goes on, but then you're in this lock-in state. Probably not necessarily related to this topic. I would suggest looking beyond open source as a solution to that. That's a part of the solution. A larger part of the solution to avoiding vendor lock-in is really taking a look at your architecture and how you are deploying systems and connecting systems, so that you're not doing a direct integration to integration, but look at different ways that we can many vendors up here and elsewhere can talk about how you can avoid that by maybe the build it yourself thing is the information bus that transfers information to one or the other. So when you've got to pull one application out of the stack, you're not affecting 6 others around there. There's microservices, lots of different technical approaches to that, but that's a really good example of one of those areas where helping us define understand the problem, avoiding vendor lock-in, that will push a lot of the product sales folks out of your out of your way in terms of response, and let us bring some innovative solutions to that problem. But that's a very prevalent, difficult, challenging problem for federal.
But I think that's a great point, Roy. I think there are, two extremes. One is whatever we bring is yours, and you own the result. And the other is really using industry standard calls between software, which is much more architected to say you can cut those strings. So X actually has other advantages that if there's a better piece of software to do the same type of work, it's easy to extract that component and put in the better software. So when you select a vendor, you should be looking for that type of thinking when they come in, and it frees up you from being tied into that vendor.
Yeah, define those kinds of things in your problem statement. This is the challenge we have.
Right.
That gives us, in the absence of that kind of understanding of your challenge, we will use whatever information is available to try to better understand the problem. One example I'll give, we mentioned SLAs. I've seen scenarios where we see a couple of new SLAs on a recompete, and we will assume, in the absence of other information, that those SLAs are telling us why you don't like the incumbent, because this didn't work very well, so now you're putting an SLA in place.
Yeah, that's right.
That could be correct, that could be way off in left field, but any kind of information you have, what it is you're trying to accomplish from an architecture standpoint, or technical standpoint, or contracting standpoint, the more you can tell us, the better we can align to that solution, or realize that we don't align to that and let somebody who's going to be better for you do the work.
So I think we've about used up the time. Thank you very much for giving us the time to discuss it with you, and